Pitch began his career as a journalist in England, Africa, and Israel. He was at various times in the Associated Press and with U.S. News and World Report. He is the author of The Burning of Washington, the British Invasion of 1814. Selection of the alternate selection of the, or it was a selection of this History Book Club, and winner of the Arlene Custer Memorial Prize for the best book of 2001 from the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference, and a recipient of the Maryland Historical Society's Annual Book Award. And that particular book has a special significance for Cindy and I, because he also did walking tours of the Burning of Washington, and she and I met on the first walking tour. Following that, Mr. Finch wrote They Have Killed Papa Dead, The Road to Ford's Theater, Abraham Lincoln's Murder, and The Rage for Vengeance. Colonel Mosley described this as, quote, a perfect storm of the book. And this book, surprisingly, also received the Arlene Custer Memorial Prize for the best book of 2009. Mr. Pitts has also appeared quite frequently on television, C-SPAN, the History Channel documentaries, National Public Radio, Fox News, BBC, so on and so forth. Tony, please come up and give us your presentation this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Buzz, for that, and it's nice to be back as a speaker. I'm going to talk about not what was built tonight. It was said that I would compare other Lincoln assassination books. I would never be so presumptuous. I want to dissect one book in particular and one movie. And I acknowledge at the beginning that I have made mistakes in my book. I was called out by one critic who said I had said that South Carolina seceded in January of 1861. I couldn't believe it, that I wrote that. And I checked my original manuscript that I sent to the publisher. The editor had added that, and I didn't catch it when he sent it back to me. But I made another error that I'm aware of. I said that there had been a threatening letter from Rochester, New York, on the eve of Lincoln's first inaugural, and a footnote and the letter quite clearly say 1865. It was for the second inaugural. So I am as guilty as the person I'm going to talk about for slip-ups. Okay, but I have a duty and an obligation to expose a fraud. Otherwise, I would be guilty of enabling this author and colluding in the fraud perpetrated on the public. The author I want to talk about is Bill O'Reilly. It has nothing to do with politics. The movie I'm going to talk about has to do with Robert Redford, and they are on the opposite extremes of their political beliefs. I'm not interested in the political aspect. I'm only interested because I revere the memory of Lincoln. I don't like it when things are made up about him. It's all right if it's amongst a small community. When it becomes a mega seller, it's hoodwinking and fooling the public on a grand scale. He has 1.5 million books in print for killing Lincoln, and it's going to have a very long shelf life. There's nothing to do with professional jealousy. I've reached the age where that doesn't enter into the picture. It might be when I was young, that might have happened. But when I was a young journalist, I set myself very high standards of integrity. As a young journalist, I was once assigned to interview a lottery winner. And when I got there, he offered me a case of whiskey. I turned him down. He said, well, at least take a bottle. I said, no. He said, have a drink with me. I said, no. He said, why? I said, the moment I accept that gift, I have compromised my objectivity. If I have to write about you later, of how you squandered your money, or you neglected your family, or you broke up your family because of something like that, I can't do it because I'm now in the palm of your hand. And so I retained that integrity. William Wilson Corcoran, the banker and philanthropist, had one of the most marvelous lines in his will. He wrote to his grandchildren, "The best bequest I can make you is a good name." And I thought, what a marvelous thing to put in a will, that the man's integrity was the main thing in his life. And that's why I'm focusing on this book, because that's where it fails. I'm going to read a lot of this. The first speech I've read in about 20 years, but I have a lot of references to the book, and so that's why I had to write it out. This book sets a new low, a really new low for non-fiction. And it actually corrupts the status of the meaning of bestseller. I read it from cover to cover. I didn't buy it, I borrowed it. But it really is bad. There is no scholarship.
Can you tell us the name of the book?
Oh, it's Killing Lincoln. I did mention it, Killing Lincoln. There is no scholarship, no accuracy, no attribution, no worthwhile research, and most of all, no shame. Proclaiming himself a former history teacher, that's what he puts in the preface, a former history teacher. He should be even more careful to be accurate. I would be ashamed to offer this up if I were a history teacher. Integrity is so essential in any undertaking. I contacted the deputy superintendent of Ford's Theatre, who had vetted his book and banned it from sale at the Lincoln Memorial Shop and at the museum shop in the Lincoln, in the Ford's Theatre. And I asked her what happened. I've heard secondhand, because I haven't watched TV for 2 years. I don't watch it anymore. Even if I'm on, I don't watch it. That would bore me even more. And I said, I've heard that he has taken you to task in his program. She said, not only that, he has put my photograph on and he's publicized my salary because I'm a public official. So he really went after her in a venomous way. But now let me get into it. You really squirm when you go through this book. I did, anyway. I squirmed. Footnotes are the footprints of every reputable author. That tells you where the author went. Bill O'Reilly has not a single footnote. Not a single footnote. And so he didn't have to remove his slippers to write this book. He moved from his bed to his armchair to his desktop. And there is no evidence of even a fleeting visit to an archive in search of anything new or refreshing. What he did is snip a little bit from here, rehash a little bit from there, and not a single attribution. Not one single attribution. That's what you do when you're cutting and pasting and marvelously rewriting. This best-selling author collaborated with him from the West Coast. And so he mentions about 3 dozen books that they consulted. One of them, to my shame, is mine. I looked for plagiarism, there isn't any. Maybe when I talked about what Lincoln has for breakfast, I noticed that he had the same items on the breakfast menu, so maybe he got there. But it's clear to me that he gave it no more than a passing glance. To bolster his credentials, O'Reilly bowed before his oracle Google, whose magic, unquote, he writes, served up many older titles. So it's a very lame book when you're talking about research. Most objectionable in this book is his addiction to fabricating thoughts and emotions. It goes right through the book. Page after page describes the private feelings of individuals, even when they are alone and far from observation by any eyewitness. Undaunted, O'Reilly is always there. An invisible presence, tape recorder in hand, to capture the mood, the mutterings, and even the melodies. Quote, Booth hums softly to himself to calm his nerves, page 194. How does he know? Video camera whirring, O'Reilly scoops everyone by reporting Booth is, quote, fearless in the bedroom, page 29. It goes on like this, right through the book. Elsewhere, indomitable researcher O'Reilly freezes as, quote, Booth makes a mental note, page 101. This is pure fabrication. The ubiquitous O'Reilly listens intently while, quote, Booth laughs at his own joke as he steps alone into the night air. page 183. With exclusive access to Booth's brain, O'Reilly generously shares that the assassin daydreams while on the run. Quote, longing for the tender flesh of Lucy Hale, a bottle of whiskey, a plate of oysters, and a warm bed, page 268. O'Reilly cups his ear as, quote, Lincoln sighs inwardly, unquote, page 89. The perceptive author observes that Lincoln's, quote, words are a sign that he is mentally transitioning from the easy part of his day, unquote, page 146. Our sleuth trails the president on a walk back to the White House, jotting down how, quote, Lincoln composes another sort of note in his head, page 127. The intrepid author is the sole eyewitness as the would-be assassin, alone in his hotel room, quote, polishes his derringer, unquote, page 182. O'Reilly is even in the president's theater box, close enough to see Lincoln reaching out in the dark for his wife's hand as she, quote, blushes at such scandalous behavior. In the dark theater, you can see her blushing. Page 187. As soon as the president is shot, O'Reilly leaps into Lincoln's body to report that the president, quote, feels a split-second snap pain, and then nothing at all, page 207. 12 days later, O'Reilly has infiltrated Booth's body, so that when a cavalryman's bullet strikes the assassin, our latter-day Forrest Gump can report, quote, Booth hears the crack of a rifle and feels a jolt in his neck, and then nothing, page 275. And here are a bit more snippets. Booth smells of drink and tobacco. The crowd at the White House is hungover, dehydrated, and sullen. Booth spins around. Where is the evidence of all this activity? Mary Todd Lincoln smiles nervously at her husband. Booth wakes from a restless sleep, his mind filled with Lincoln's presence so angered Booth that he delivered a poor performance. Lincoln slides with battered slippers. Petitioners sleeping in the hallway leap to their feet upon the sight of Lincoln. Page 144. Lincoln opens a Bible and leans back to meditate. How do we know? He could have opened the Bible and sat down on the floor. He often lay down on the floor. Today, it is as if Lincoln subconsciously knows what is about to happen. Booth kisses the ring given by Lucy as he waits for her to open the door. How on earth does he know that? The doorman nods graciously as Grant steps inside. There was no eyewitness. Grant's feelings of unease about that evening's plans lingers. Page 167. Booth is on an emotional roller coaster, his spirits rising and falling. You see the fabrication of thoughts and emotions all the time. Payne is lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Page 168. Page 172. Energy whooshes out of Booth as the alcohol wears off. Page 192. Feeling very pleased with himself, Booth pops into Talsvold's for a whiskey. Page 193. Booth, heart racing, skin clammy to the touch, is desperately trying to appear cool and calm. I mean, where does this come from, other than from a figment of his imagination? Page 194. Booth breathes a sigh of relief that the bodyguard is still in the saloon. Next page. Booth thinks of the Confederate cause and Lincoln's promise to give slaves the vote. 2 pages later, Booth takes a deep breath. Frederick's body makes a horrible thud as he collapses, gray brain matter trickling out. Payne, his senses heightened, his broad shoulders aching. Page 205. Andrew Johnson lies down on the bed, fully clothed, as if some great incident is about to occur. Who was there besides Andrew Johnson, who never wrote about it? 221. Laura Keene knows at this moment is Michelangelo's Pieta, come to life with her as Mary and Lincoln as Christ. 224. The faithful make the sign of the cross as Lincoln is carried out of the theater. 249. Harold's gut tells him that the whistle, when it comes, will be their only warning before the U.S. cavalry ride in with guns blazing. The errors are as prolific as the fabrication of thoughts and feelings. Most egregious are the references to the Oval Office. blissfully unaware that it was built in the early years of the 20th century. Best-selling historian writes that, quote, Lincoln is sitting at his desk in the Oval Office, page 146. Later he has Lincoln summoning a messenger, quote, between Oval Office appointments, unquote, page 154. Writing that Lincoln was in the Oval Office is as silly as saying that James Madison rushed to save a portrait of Lincoln from the Oval Office before fleeing the White House in 1840, or that Lincoln exposed himself to enemy fire at Fort Stevens to win the admiration of his troops. In his serene ignorance, this self-proclaimed, quote, former teacher of history, page 1, states that Mary Surratt suffered, quote, the claustrophobia and disfigurement caused by the hood, page 278. A revelation, considering that she never had to wear a canvas hood after the opening day of the trial. That was because of her gender. On his joyride to the pantheon of historians, O'Reilly informs us that Mary Surratt's, quote, cell aboard the Montauk, unquote, was barely habitable, page 278. A baffling conclusion, given that she was never imprisoned in that ironclad. The acclaimed author lets us in on deliberations of, quote, the 9-member jury, page 278, even though there was no jury at all in the trial before military judges. You see, this goes beyond slipshod forgetfulness. This is fundamental. No scholar would write that Lincoln sat in the Oval Office. No historian worth his salt would write that the military commission had a jury. No scholar would assert that Mary Surratt was confined aboard the Montauk. No scholar would claim that Mary Surratt suffered from claustrophobia and disfigurement caused by the hood that was never over her head. There are so many other errors, and I list them now by sentences, page 187. Lincoln is entirely invisible to everybody in the theater, except for those in the box and the actors on stage. You can quite clearly see him from the circle. Page 197, the author has Daniel Sickles shooting his mistress's husband. Everybody knows Dan Sickles shot his wife's lover, not his mistress's husband. Page 201, Payne knocked Fanny Seward in the face and unconscious. He didn't. She was there watching it, and she later recorded it in her diary, the attack on her father. Page 203, the unsuspecting soldiers run right past Payne as he's fleeing. Had they got him then, they wouldn't have been missing for 3 days. Page 280, soldiers stand atop the penitentiary walls just in case a last-minute rider approaches with a pardon. Where does he get that from? They were there in case there was going to be some kind of riot down below. If this had been presented as a 5th grade paper, the teacher might have written at the bottom, Billy, do not invent feelings and emotions. You will get a D until you learn to write only what you can document. Otherwise, we call it fiction. While O'Reilly merrily sidesteps and leapfrogs over facts, Robert Redford is more confrontational in his contempt for historical accuracy in the movie The Conspirator. He would have us believe that Mary Surratt was allowed to dine on delicacies. Her son was allowed to dine on delicacies. No. The first woman hanged by the federal government suffered barbarous treatment during captivity. That's what he claims. His camera focuses on a ball and chain clamped to her leg. I will never forget that. I saw the movie twice. One was the invitation of the executive producer, the second time, to make sure that I was going to get it right when I criticized it. It was pure fiction. It never happened. She did not have a ball and chain while she was confined. On the contrary, in deference to her gender, prison authorities gave Mary Surratt a rocking chair and fed the lone female prisoner a less restrictive diet than the males. In one outburst after another, Redford has Mary Surratt leaping to her feet in righteous anger over incriminating testimony against her. At the end of the movie, the executive producer invited comments. I let others go first, to hog the limelight. I presented my credentials, and I said, why did you say that there was an outburst after outburst? Why did you film it of her rising up in anger? he said to me, have you ever been to a capital murder trial? I said, no. He said, I've been to 5. And at every one there was an outburst. Don't you think it logical that there was an outburst at the Lincoln Conspirators trial? And I was mumbling there something about history is not written upon conjecture, when he interrupted me and said, why didn't you give the microphone to somebody else? And I did. But it goes on. See, this is really as bad as the book. At the actual trial in 1865, she never once rose to protest. Journalists and diarists who attended the daily proceedings over 7 weeks saw a broken and dispirited woman, cowed, frightened, and hollow, screening herself from public view with a veil and a hand-held fan. That her co-accused was similarly submissive did not deter Redford from having them thump and bellow in their own show of raucous and righteous anger. You see them thumping on the table. It didn't happen. They were as broken as she was. Redford's star of The Conspirator is a dignified and noble woman who walks upright and steadily to the gallows, notwithstanding that the real Mary Surratt was so crushed she could barely advance 1 foot in front of the other without the aid of the clerics. Dismissive of records proving that Mary's incarcerated son John was allowed to dine on delicacies brought him by relatives and sympathizers and to strut the corridor smoking his pipe, Redford instead has him confined in similarly harsh and punitive conditions like his mother. It didn't happen. The twin charlatans, that's what I call them, the twin charlatans, had pulled a fast one, conning millions of devotees and Civil War buffs. Fortunately, Redford's movie has finished its run. But O'Reilly's, quote, truly shocking, unquote, masterpiece, that's what he called it, true and truly shocking. This masterpiece will have a very long shelf life. There are more, as I told you, more than 1.5 million books in print, according to Frank Williams' later Lincolniana. And critics were fleetingly vindicated after the book was banned from the shops at the Lincoln Memorial and the Ford's Theatre. It was brief consolation. The virus that O'Reilly let loose is still out there, corrupting the record and fooling the public. So, you see, I'm not going for the individual. I'm going to put the record straight, because there are already about 3 million, because each book is read, say, by 2 people. 3 million people can't believe, and a lot of people get their historical information and the tutoring either in the movie theater or from books. And this is not how it happened. So they go away with a false impression of what it was all about. It's a mega seller. It's been #1 on Amazon for a very, very long time, and it's going to continue like that. I repeat, there is no sense of jealousy here, just outrage that the man can get away with that. The author, because I'm targeting an author, not a man, the author can get away with it. And the publishers are equally as guilty, because they should have had an editor that would scan this and screen it and go through it with a fine comb and find what's wrong and send it back for correction. Instead, they put it out there like it is, and it's become a mega seller. So, with that, I offer this up as my opinion, and I repeat, I'm not after the man. One of these, this author is a known extreme right. Robert Redford is extreme left. My opening paragraph on the online review I wrote of the movie goes like this: nobody likes to pan a decent fellow like Robert Redford, who's done so much for the betterment of the planet and the less advantaged. That does not absolve him from well-deserved scorn for offering up fraudulent history in his new movie, The Conspirator. That's only the opening. So he's bad as the body. And now I would welcome all the comments.
Well, so much for any future appearances on Fox. I would like to, in rebuttal, say that I do believe that the book, at least the paperback edition, is very useful for anyone who owns a parakeet or a hamster. Okay, let's start getting questions. Yes, sir.
Did he bill it as nonfiction or historical fiction?
It is billed as his words in the preface, true and truly shocking.
Wow. But he did, I mean...
True means non-fiction.
Well, 50% isn't truly shocking.
He got his name right.
And probably, do you know that he wrote it, or was it co-writer probably wrote it, he just put his name on it?
That's not the point. You see, that would be the easy way out, to say that he had a professional best-selling author. But when you collaborate, you're as guilty as the fellow who squeezes the trigger.
But I figured all he contributed was his name.
His name? Well, he's claiming, he says he's a former history teacher, you see. And so he's not backing down. He's not allowing this other fellow to overshadow him. He's claiming as much kudos as the co-author. Much more the other fellow gets overshadowed because Will O'Reilly has got the name.
Is your talk, is this online anywhere? Because I have relatives who swear by this book, and I'd like to send your presentation to them.
I don't mind putting it online.
Oh, I'd like to
put
get a
over
copy
to the
of
Lincoln group if you
this
like.
talk.
Sure.
This will be online tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, sir, up in front.
Gone with the Wind is most American view of the Civil War. I'd love to see you take on Gone with the Wind.
That's not fair. Because I live in our times. Those are different times. This fellow has overshadowed all the books on Lincoln's assassination, including Jim Swanson, because he has removed Jim Swanson from the top of the list. I speak to our times, and I'm focused on him. I've gone through the book, and I've given you the page numbers. If I had to speak about Gone with the Wind, I would have to go through that with a fine comb. She didn't write it as a non-fiction, as the authentic story of
I don't know most Americans take Gone with the Wind as history.
If they do, they're very silly.
They do though. They do though.
Let's have some other questions. Yes, sir. Roger.
Okay, Tony, would you speak about when you think it is appropriate for literary license in the writing of American history?
When would literary license in writing American history be permissible?
I don't think at all. I really don't. If you're calling it non-fiction, you know, I hope I didn't stray. I was so careful. I've noticed it in other books, and I'm not going to mention the authors because I'm not here to denigrate any other author. I picked this book because it's become such a big seller, and I wanted to puncture it because it's not right that so many millions should be fooled. There are few of us who've spent a long time. I spent 9 years on my book, and I still made mistakes, as I've said. But these are so fundamental, they go to the heart of the story. You cannot talk about an Oval Office, you cannot talk about her being
Well, I agree with you that the errors are inexcusable, but I don't agree that talking about booths of motion when there is no documentation is such a bad thing.
You don't think it's a bad thing?
Such a bad thing.
Such a bad.
I'm sorry, we are at opposite ends of the pole on that. If you cannot insert yourself into anybody else's brain, if it isn't documented, it didn't make it into my book, and I stick by that.
Okay, we're getting close to the time when people's tickets are going to expire, so we're going to take 2 more questions.
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
The lady way in the back had her hand up.
How do you take to task all of the history books that have been written for our grade schoolers and our high schoolers over the course of centuries now?
Oh, okay, she's a question about
You know,
the books that are written for elementary school.
we perpetuate these myths.
The do
Right.
sometimes expand when you use literary license.
I don't think those books should be sold. Do you remember that one on Virginia history?
Oh,
No.
Well, that's a good example.
Yeah, the fourth grade
They
history.
really castigated that author.
John,
I volunteer as an interpretive guide at Ford's Theater. Every time I'm there, people ask me about killing Lincoln. There are 2 points after I read it that I want to ask you about because you didn't mention it. First is O'Reilly's view that President Andrew Johnson was too tough on the South. And second, his insinuation that Edwin Stanton was somehow involved in the assassination. These are the points that I make to folks at the theater because I think they go to the heart of the historical story, that they aren't just making things up. They get to the heart of where he's fundamentally wrong about things that happened in history. Could you comment on that?
When I got to the section about Stanton being responsible, I was looking for something to substantiate that, because few people subscribed to that Stanton was in on it, on a conspiracy to get rid of Lincoln. There is no evidence for that, none at all. It's all circumstantial. And O'Reilly offers nothing new to substantiate it. You see, Stanton was at Seward's bedside. Stewart had just been stabbed. And Stanton is dabbing the blood on Seward's mouth. And Seward turns round to him. This is in Fanny's diary. She was an eyewitness. And Seward says to Stanton, "Stanton, you have made me cry for the first time in my life." How could a man as sensitive as that be guilty of murdering the man that he really loved? So that is, and he offers nothing, absolutely nothing, just a couple of sentences to take you off the beaten track on some new fanciful idea. Andrew Johnson, the same thing. It's just another detour off the story. There's no substance to this book, and the reason there's no substance is because he literally cut and pasted from other books. There is no attribution, not a single footnote. So you can't say where he got it unless you're the author and you recognize it. I read it for plagiarism, but fortunately didn't find any.
Yes, a hand over here, over here. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, following up on that, when I read Killing Lincoln, there were 2 factoids that leaped out at me that I may have garbled them by now, but I'll throw them out for comment. One was that Stanton held on to John Wilkes Booth's diary, and then when he had to finally turn it over to some authority in a marvelous present to Rosemary Woods, there were 18 pages missing. And the second one was, I believe he claimed that when there's some Confederate money divvied up in Canada, and Lafayette Baker got some of that money.
The second was about Lafayette Baker getting some money. Was the money supposed to be
I can't quite remember. Apparently the Confederates were distributing money up in Montreal, and
their money?
Yeah, but there was some money that passed out for Confederate agents or something, and Lafayette Baker is supposed to have gotten a piece of it. Now, again, it's a long time since I read the book, so I'm not doubting that.
You used the word supposed. You see, supposed to have got it. That's what you just used. That means there's no documentary evidence. I never found any documentary evidence. What was the other one again? Well, I'm sorry,
the 18 pages. The 18 pages.
Oh yeah, the 18 pages. Nobody's ever been able to find out what happened to the missing pages of Booth's diary. It could have been taken by the detective when he was coming back to Washington. He admits that he tried to, he opened it up. He's alone now. Nobody could stop it. He could have done it. It could have done while it was in the custody of Baker. There are many, but there's no documentary evidence of what happened, you see, and that's why I steered clear of it. Because if I couldn't document it, that's supposition. And you cannot put supposition into a book, not my books anyway. It's got to be documented.
Another theory is that Booth himself tore the pages out. He uses no
we know that he did, for one, to thank the man for feeding him.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
Just when I talked in November, I started off. That was the day the article of the Ford's Theater banning the book, or supposedly not. And the article, I have not read the book. I still haven't read it. But the article describes several factual errors, as you alluded to in your own work. And if that was the extent of it, I would simply point out that there is no book that doesn't escape some of these small factual errors. Those tend to get picked up by other authors and repeated, and then they become part of the iconography that we all rely on without going back to the source document. That's one set of problems. The only heartening insight we take from this is that I've read a lot of Lincoln material over the past 2 years since the book's been out. I haven't found anybody who has cited this book in their work. So while it is a mass media phenomenon, it has not been picked up by any of the people who actually.
And it could be in the future. It could be in the future, in another generation, when they don't know how riddled it is with fabrication and fantasy. They might, and a school kid might pick it up and use it for material for a paper on Lincoln's assassination. So these are the things that can happen, you see, down the line.
Okay, this really is the final question. Final question.
Well, you're here. Okay. Isn't there, 1.5 million people will get exposed to Lincoln who probably wouldn't have otherwise? Isn't there some value in that? I still remember as a kid watching Henry Fonda and Young Mr. Lincoln, Raymond Massey, and I was in awe, and it turned me on to history in a lot of ways. Isn't there perhaps some value in that, even with all the mistakes?
Not when it's an iconic figure, because then it is taken as gospel. If it were just every Tom, Dick, and Harry, that would be fine. This is an icon. He has a captive audience of millions. In our time, people who have talk shows on TV, they become monstrously, monumentally large in the possibility of controlling people's outlooks and thoughts. And so the opportunity there to offer up a false history, fraudulent history, is there, and he's taken it.
If he said on the first page, this is a work of historical fiction based upon the events, would you have any problem?
Yes, because that's what Robert Redford said. This is based on actual events. That gave him license to go from fantasy to hallucination. You see? There's absolutely no restriction at all. And Bill O'Reilly is going to sell millions more and corrupt the outlook of many people on this particular incident in American history. There's no getting away from it. Libraries report it, and it's online. All these kids who don't know Bill O'Reilly his credentials, which are non-existent for this, they regard it, if it's a bestseller, that's the one they'll go to. See? It's as simple as that.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I still think it's a fine book for lovers of hamsters and parakeets. It's a full memento to remember.
Thank you very much.